Hello, and welcome to the Survivor Summit, powered by Milagros Day Worldwide. My name is Gabrielle Spierer, and I'm a graduate of Healing Voices, and I am thrilled, honored, and very excited to be your host with this interview. Today, I'm joined by Brenda Adelman, the writer and performer of My Brooklyn Hamlet. It's a one-woman show about the power of forgiveness. She's also the founder of Forgiveness and Freedom, where she uses the art of self expression and storytelling to help others deal with their life experiences through her storytelling classes and forgiveness workshops. So, welcome. How,
Thank you.
how are you?
And well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this summit.
And we are so excited to have you. You have some really unique experience. And since the theme of this event is we are all survivors of something, what do you feel you have survived in your life or are still surviving?
Yeah, well, in 1995, my father, who I adored, I was definitely daddy's little girl growing up, shot and killed my mother. And then within a month moved in with and then married my mother's sister, my aunt. So I would say I'm a survivor of, you could say, domestic violence. I'm a survivor of extreme and sudden loss. I'm a survivor of someone being brought up with a narcissistic parent. And I've done so much healing over the past 20 years. I've been coaching actually on the topic of forgiveness since 2000 and around 2005. I have a critically acclaimed storytelling one-person show that I do. And am I still surviving it? I would say there are things we live through in life that it changes us forever, but I would more say I'm thriving versus thriving. I mean, thriving versus surviving.
Wow, that's really wonderful. And I guess later on I can ask you how you managed to do that. But
Or you can ask me now.
okay, so to ask you, so how are you thriving and is doing how is doing all of this work that you're doing contributing to help you in that in any way?
Yes, I mean, because the first few years I couldn't talk about anything. I was so filled with shame. I felt like I was damaged because of my parents. I was crying, I wasn't sleeping, and it was really firstly writing out what I was feeling in my head and putting it on the pages of my journal when I couldn't sleep at night and witnessing what I had lived through versus trying to compartmentalize or be like, I love my father, I hate my father, wishing that, I could turn back time. But actually putting it down on the page helped me have extreme compassion for myself. And then I channeled it into poetry that expressed my, darkest feelings when I, Brenda, couldn't do it. And then I turned that into a story and a storytelling exercise in a top acting class in LA, never thinking I would tell my story in a successful one-person show. But the response was so amazing, getting a standing ovation and then people coming over to me and telling me how just me sharing honestly like that and with some humor and with depth and with loss, but vulnerably, helped heal them. And so then a director wanted to work with me, a producer. I turned it into a one-person show that gave me the impetus to it. But then it was, inhabiting the character of my father, the greatest nemesis. I would say I had to find compassion for him as more than just the events, because as an actor, you wouldn't play yourself as evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helped me heal. And then I went back to school, got a master's degree in spiritual psychology, which let me move from why did this happen to, okay, now that it happened, how can I thrive? And then doing the show. And every time I do the one-person show, which I've performed, for over 12,000 people, I set an intention to learn something more about my family, but it no longer hurts me. It's a rich feeling of self-expression because I also apply so much self-forgiveness and so much distance, as well as being in the moment when I'm playing the story. So it is really healing. And I
Wow.
I teach storytelling to others so that they could consciously bring their story to the light so they can love themselves through it and then explore the different aspects of what happened.
Yeah, that's a really important part, being able to learn to be able to love yourself
Yeah.
and to treat yourself with compassion for
It's
what
the ultimate
you have
thing.
gone through. So those are the kind of skills, and abilities and expertise that you seem to have developed that really helped you to contribute,
Yes, and it was a
to.
journey of doing
Yeah,
everything I could to make myself feel better.
yeah, but yes, and you seem to have done everything to make yourself feel better, though, in a positive way, because it's people can make themselves feel better in destructive
Right.
ways.
Right.
So
Mine has been
through,
about conscious awareness, but along the way, I mean, I'd say when I wasn't conscious, when I was just kind of living the past and looping what had happened in my life, that was a time where I would, oftentimes people have addictions, I would over exercise and I would overeat. So I'd overeat and then I would, this was what would happen. I would overeat. And then in my quiet times to myself, I would like badger myself and just put myself down for gaining weight. Then I would exercise so that I wouldn't gain as much weight, but then I'd overdo it. And then I would end up having an injury and having to stop. But what happened, it was so unconscious at the time. It was a way of me handling things when I couldn't handle that my father, shot and killed my mother. Instead of paying attention to that, which was where I needed to heal, I would beat myself up. So I kind of took it to another place. So that was the first thing. But when I got conscious of that, partly from going through my master's degree in spiritual psychology and seeing, well, where's their unconscious behavior? When I got conscious of it, coupled with the tools of self-forgiveness, self-love, inner child's work, then I could let go of the addictions, right? But I mean, there was, I isolated. I was afraid to trust anyone in the beginning. And so the people I would have in my life were victims, like had a victim mentality like I did, like, oh my God, look how horrible this is. And it was horrible, just like people listening to this may have lived through horrible things. But while I stayed in that place, I was disempowered. And the people in my life reflected that back because they were also disempowered by life. When I started to look at, okay, this happened, I'm not responsible for it happening, but I'm responsible for myself. What tools can I learn so I can get up out of how I'm feeling? And as soon as I started to learn those tools and apply them, my friends changed. All of a sudden, I had other people that were more positive and they were reflecting back my positive stance. And all of a sudden, instead of attracting people who were emotionally not there, like I wasn't emotionally there, then they were emotionally there for me.
wow, it sounds like too, from what you were saying, that one of the big steps that really helped you to cross that threshold was going to school,
Yeah, the
because you
masters.
started to, did you ever go to like traditional counseling to try to deal with some of that?
Oh my God. No, first I went to counseling. Like I had counseling for about a year. I still remember I went back to New York. I was living in California. I went back to New York and then my manager at the time had already set up a therapy session for me, which was so loving. And so I went to therapy right away. I don't think I could have gotten through those first few months if I didn't have a wonderful therapist who I still remember calling her the day my father was arrested the first time because I was so conflicted. Like a lot of people who are maybe survivors of domestic violence, like
Mhm.
conflicted that my father was going to prison and hating him so much for killing my mother. But I remember calling her after hours and her being there for me. So yes, first I went to therapy. I went for acupuncture. I finally found my way to the master's in spiritual psychology. When I got out of there, I did a primal scream workshop. I had a shamanic journey, like I kept searching until I started to feel better. And then in my show and presenting on stage, I really looked at my story, looked at the characters, looked at, people who didn't have tools, who had thwarted expectations. I looked at everything trying to move out of blame so I could look at it clearly, and it's extremely helpful.
That's really wonderful. It seems like you made a conscious effort to do something positive, that you had two choices: one, to let the negative ways, stay in your life, or
Yeah.
to make that conscious effort to be positive and to want to heal and turn your negative that
Yeah.
occurred to you to really survive, to go
Yeah.
from being the victim to the survivor, you know.
Yeah. It just
Mhm,
hurt
mhm.
so badly. And I feel really grateful that somehow I was open enough, whether it was my mother's spirit living in me, whether it was an experience that I did have an experience with something bigger than me, whether it's God, universal presence, whatever. I did have that experience after my mother died. And it was that impulse inside me that had me tell my story. It was that impulse inside me that got me to, the open house for the master's degree.
Yeah.
So it
So
was, I don't even feel like it was a conscious choice. I felt like it was just a knowing, and I followed it though. I was open to that. And sometimes these things we go through that bring us to our knees actually open us up.
yeah, and in that respect, maybe your mother's spirit is with you all the time, and you're
Absolutely. Absolutely.
carrying on the
Yeah.
love that she had for you, to do that. What advice, comfort, or encouragement would you give other women or girls who've experienced something similar to what you survived, and how can someone else move forward?
Yeah. I'd say the biggest surprise for me was that I had to forgive myself. And I was like, well, why? It was him that did it. But I really realized over the years that you can only love someone as much as you love yourself. You can only forgive someone as much as you forgive yourself. You can only let someone, like, it's not letting him off. I didn't let him off the hook because I took him to court for wrongful death after he got out of his 2.5-year sentence. But I let myself off the hook emotionally by forgiving him. So I never, that when I think about him, it's like, for those of you listening, when you're thinking about someone who has hurt you, you're giving them power, and they don't deserve that power. So it's looking at it and saying, well, who has dominion over what I think about right now? It is not that person, it is you. But you have to take your power back, especially if you've been in any kind of situation where you've learned or feel like a second-class citizen. You need to take your power back, not in a way that is unloving to yourself or other people, but take it back and set a healthy boundary. Taking my dad to court for wrongful death, I couldn't even forgive him until I made that decision because I had to stand up to him. But I took him to court from self-love and self-honor versus punishment, which frees me, because the energy of punishment hurts me. So it's like looking at, what can you think, what can you do, what can you believe that's going to have you be free of that negativity, or even that feeling of wanting to punish. Like, allow the universe to take care of that. You know what I'm saying? Because
And there's
otherwise you'll spend
definitely
your
a
lifetime in
right,
that energy.
and there's always a higher power.
Yeah,
There
and you know
you,
what?
you know,
It might not look like you're getting the justice you want. My father, I took him to court. My brother and I won a $2.2 million judgment, and we never collected because he skipped town.
oh
But
wow,
I'm not in control of that either.
right.
I'm just in control of what I did. I stood up to him, and I needed to
Mhm.
do that.
You confronted your abuser, and
Yeah, even though he
that is
didn't
a
show
very
up.
empowering, situation. I can tell.
Yes, and he didn't show up, but that was okay, because that's the other thing, is you do not need anything from someone else for you to have closure, because I never really got closure. My father never said, yes, I did it, or gave me the, I mean,
Mhm.
the plea bargain did, but he never, he skipped town.
Mhm.
So I set out to have closure myself, to reparent myself, to be the divine masculine expression that I was seeking from him, integrated into myself. So it's an inside job. I guess that's what I would leave the audience with. It's an inside
Okay.
job.
So in closing, because
So
we have just very little time left,
yeah.
what would
So,
you, how would you close, and what would you
well, what
say?
I would close is, I would say it is about self-love and also setting healthy boundaries. And I've given a gift to the people who are
Oh,
who
that's
are
wonderful.
watching this. I have a free e-course called "The Top 5 Reasons to Never Forgive and Why You Must," taken from in-person workshops I used to lead. And just for people of this summit, in the summit, on that page, you'll also find my ebook, which is usually sold on Kindle. My father killed my mother and married my aunt, Forgiving the Unforgivable. That is free for you guys until Wednesday. And so when you sign up, you'll also get inside that book my entire story, and then my 3-step proven forgiveness process with exercises.
That is wonderful, and we thank you so much.
Thank you.
I thank you, and I'm sure everybody thanks you for your honesty and bravery and sharing your story and helping so many people. And if anybody wants to go further, I know that you do workshops
I
and
do
you do
workshops, I do coaching.
classes on forgiveness and telling your story. So
Yes,
thank you for being with us and
thank you.
and spending your time in a very wonderful way to educate us.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that was right at 15 minutes. Maybe it'll,
Great.
it was
Do
hard to
you,
keep
need, do you want to
exactly.
shut the recording or do you want to keep it on?
Well, we could keep the recording on.
Okay, someone's going to be editing? Okay,
Yeah, I don't know. She said they're not going to edit it.
well, then
That's
you
why
should
they
shut the
wanted to
recording.
do the take. I mean,
But then
I think it
you
came
should
out.
shut the recording then.
Well, they're going to probably chop
Oh,
here
okay.
and there, the beginning and the end, and
Okay.
do all of that. That was really great.
Great. Awesome.
I think we led each other. I mean, you led me sometimes, and I was
Yeah,
trying to. I know Dawn wanted the question, so I was trying to make sure
great.
we answered
I
the
think it went
question right
great.
up. No, it was great. You're really wonderful to be so honest with that, and I think that's what helps you to heal, but it also helps other people to say, if you can be honest with that for yourself, I can begin to be honest and deal with the feelings and everything that I'm going through.
Absolutely.
So that's,
Absolutely. That's always my hope, that by sharing also that people don't feel like they're alone, that they know, because most people feel so alone. And then if
that,
they hear my story, they might not have the exact same story, but they know someone's been through something big. So then that makes them feel not so alone.
yeah, that's a really great, feeling to be. And I think it's also, even from some of my experiences, it's really hard for friends to deal with other people's difficult experiences. Especially survivors of more typical domestic violence. Nothing is typical, but I'm just saying that, that as a survivor, admitting to ourselves, which is one of the reasons I think it's so hard to get traction and have people understand, is I let somebody into my life that did that to me. So, turning it inward to
I know
be
that's
like, how could I do that?
that's why the self-forgiveness is so important.
Yeah,
And then learning, not just, it's like self-forgiveness, because then you'll make more self-honoring choices once you forgive yourself and love yourself more, right? Because if you
yeah.
just, you really have to turn into someone who makes self-honoring choices.
But it also takes time to develop that intuition and understanding, and being on
Yeah,
the out
especially if
and
you've
being
been
on the
beaten
outside
down.
looking in,
Mhm.
to see what the person is like truly at a distance. Because when you're in it, you
Yeah,
really you're more susceptible,
especially if you haven't had outside influence, Yeah, absolutely.
you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would think that if you looked at yourself today and then looked at yourself even the first 5 years afterwards,
No,
you probably see
I'm
things very
completely
different.
different. I'm on a yeah, it's a journey. It's definitely a journey, not a destination, for
Yeah,
sure.
and for the good and the not so good, to enjoy the journey, because it's never a straight line going up. It's always sideways, and sometimes you go backwards. And having the
Absolutely.
compassion, self-compassion, to give yourself a break.